in support of the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals 7, energy access and clean energy access, the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and really my aim at the end of this presentation is to make sure that you have a better idea how the climate information, climate data, climate analysis is important for developing resilient energy. So now, am I changing something or not?
No, we see the same slide.
Yeah. Use it now.
It's moved to the next slide. Okay,
so I know how it works. So let me say a few words about WMO, and it's a UN specialized agency with competencies on weather, water, and climate. It is a mechanism for coordinating the MET services around the world. Our members are the countries, are 195 countries, but the representative of these members to the Congress, to our Congress, are the director of the MET services. And we are based in Geneva, Switzerland. So few years, 10 years ago actually, WMO came out with a vision of how we should develop or promote the climate knowledge and translate it into action, support the decision making, and especially to help develop plans, national plans for adaptation and mitigation, and also managing and assessing climate risks. We published a report, which is Climate Knowledge for Action. We launched a vision, which was called the Global Framework for Climate Services, and we identified 5 priority areas where we want to work and develop these climate services and action for action. And the 5 priority areas are agriculture and food security, disaster risk reduction, water, health, and energy. So what is a climate services in practice? Is really a tool or a product that is designed to support decision making, is based on the best available state-of-the-art climate science, and we are talking about data and analysis, is tailored to the needs of the users, and also this includes also the timely delivery of this information, and it builds on the strong engagement with the users of this information. We are talking about the co-production, co-development, and co-production of these products. Is really tailored to the needs. So when we talk about energy and climate or meteorology, here is an example of why climate services are important, or at least I would say we know that at different time scales and also different geographical scales, events, meteorological and climate events have an impact on the energy system. And we have at short time scales, it could be the lightning and the clouds and the thunderstorms, which affect the grids, but also going through the longer time scales, we have droughts, for example, for hydropower or El Nino events, which has different impacts different in the world. And I would say it's not mentioned here, but of course, wildfire and cold spells and heat spells. So this is something which is well known in our community. But I would say it's also important to understand that climate change, the energy system is a major responsible of climate change, and the energy sector is has to undergo, and this is based on the Paris Agreement, has to undergo a decarbonization that which implies a huge transformation of the way that we generate energy. In this sense, it is important to deploy the solution that we know for this, for mitigating climate change, which is rely more and more on renewable sources of energy, like wind, solar, and hydro. And those sources are extremely, we know they are variable and they depend from the meteorology and all the events that I just mentioned on my slides before. So for climate information that provides information on the variability and how to manage these sources will be more and more important in the future as we deploy more and more renewable resources for energy. Here is an example of here is an example of the time scales, what we are talking about, what are the products that could be used for generating this climate information. We go through the climatology, and or better product, which we call it a reanalysis. I don't explain what it is, reanalysis, but it is basically a refined database of the past, which is important because it provides information for the production size and planning of our production plans. But then while we move through the present to the future, we know that nowcasting, for example, is important for market trading. Short, medium range forecast is important for knowing how much energy production is in the future. And then if we go through climate prediction, which we goes from 2 weeks to 18 months, is important for optimizing the system and also for maintenance and so on. You know, more we have more information in the future where we are more able to build resilient power plants and have a better idea of the resources in the future. And as you can see that all these products, they come with kind of uncertainty, and the uncertainty, of course, grows more we look into the future. I already used my whole time, but maybe I just try to finish quickly. And this is another way of looking at applications of these climate services for the energy systems, really categorized for the time scales that we are looking at those variables. Quickly say that WMO has a publication, we call it the Climate Services for Energy Exemplar, which was put together by many partners about 5 years ago, and we put forward three priorities for this climate services for energy sector. And here is the link that you can download it from the web. also just quickly maybe go to the fact that we are now, as a part of the WMO constituency, putting together a study group on energy, and is pretty much try to have all the partners together, working together to develop these climate services, and to also come out with some, and try to really have a better integration and a better idea how met services in the country can better serve the energy businesses in their own country. And I finish here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Roberta, for that. From what I've gathered, it's that the energy system is responsible for climate change, and it can also be the answer for that. So thank you very much. And next we have Ron Benioff, a lab program manager for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, where he leads science and technology and analysis cooperation in support of the US government programs and with research institutes, governments, international agencies, foundations, and other partners from all around the world. He also serves as the executive director of the NEDS Global Partnership, where he guides activities of the partnership across regional partnerships, topical working groups, and more than 300 member institutions. In addition, he manages NREL's work in support of various clean energy ministerial initiatives, including the Clean Energy Solutions Center, providing clean energy policy resources, expert advice, and training to countries all around the world. Along with leading NREL's international programs, Ron has served as manager of the lab's analysis and state and local programs. Prior to joining NREL in 1997, he worked as the US Environmental Protection Agency for 11 years on climate change and waste management issues. Welcome, Mr. Ron.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about some of Nrel's programs, and more importantly, to focus on the dramatic transitions that are happening in the power system towards a future that will be low carbon, diverse, and reliable. So just a quick word. So the National Renewable Energy Laboratory is a Department of Energy laboratory. It's the largest energy efficiency renewable energy laboratory in the world, located in Colorado, and very happy to collaborate with all of you and share information with everyone who is here. The exciting changes in our power systems around the world are leading to more diversity of resources on the supply side, in managing the grids, and on the demand side. And this diversity is increasing the reliability and resilience of the power system. It's also posing some technical challenges, but the challenges are definitely ones that we can overcome and are overcoming around the world. And we have a tremendous opportunity in front of us now to have a transition to low emission, low cost, and reliable power systems. The transition requires three key solutions. We need to have knowledge and awareness and engagement through the political economy at all levels of stakeholders. The youth have an especially critical role here. We need to work in parallel on the market design and the policy and regulatory structures that will enable the business models of the future to thrive. And we need to address technical challenges that we face as we go to this more diverse power system with a larger scale up of variable renewable energy generation. And in all areas, we need to scale up the action and collaboration on these political economy, market, and technical solutions. The exciting, one of the most exciting trends is that the costs for renewable energy have been declining dramatically to the point where renewable energy costs are cost competitive, and in most places are cheaper than conventional fossil fuel options. And we're seeing a rapid scale up in the deployment of renewable energy and power systems in all regions of the world, to the point where variable renewable generation is becoming a dominant source of electricity generation in many regions and countries, and eventually will be the dominant source of generation, we believe, in almost all power systems. And that's a very exciting development. It's one that's being driven by technology cost reductions and scale up, but it's also being driven by changes in how power is procured. And almost all regions and countries of the world are moving to competitive tenders and auctions, which are leading to very dramatic low-cost bids for power, for wind, for solar, but primarily, but also for other renewable technologies such as biomass, hydro, and geothermal. There are a number of solutions that are critical to enable large amounts of variable renewable energy generation to be managed on the grid. When you have very high amounts of wind and solar, you have to deal with the fact that they're not entirely predictable. There also are challenges in managing the difference of variability in frequency and voltage that comes with a large amount of inverter-based resources. And some of the key solutions that are available are to scale up of the use of very advanced solar and wind forecasting to understand with a great degree of precision at a temporal scale with what the forecasted generation will look like. That, along with a large balancing area, so have an interconnected grid with generation across a large area, can smooth out the variability and help manage the grid. Bringing in large amounts of storage, battery storage, as well as other forms of storage, ensures that we have a backup and reliable source of energy over long time periods. That, along with flexibility with conventional generation that sits on the system, an ability to manage demand for residential, business, and industrial users is absolutely critical throughout this system as we scale up the amount of renewable generation. Having also the ability increasingly to manage how electrification of demand interacts with the system. So vehicle electrification, buildings, industrial electrification, and we need very smart controllers to do that, to manage the increased number of vehicle charging stations, for example, and moving to very smart and interactive grids, both at the bulk power level, but as well at the microgrid level. We have increasing amounts of generation that are distributed along with demand and storage. You need very smart controllers and effectively designed grids to manage that effectively. One of the key trends, along with the scale up of low-cost renewable generation, is this electrification of end-use energy supply. And we're seeing this around the world. It's an incredibly exciting trend to see the demand move towards, towards power of heating and cooling of industrial processes of transport through electricity. And this is happening with the heating and cooling demand for buildings, residences, industry, the conversion of electricity to gases and liquid fuels as well, and a large scale up happening in all regions towards electric vehicles, both for personal use and for fleets, as well as for large-scale transport and heavy-duty vehicles. This requires extra efforts to manage kind of these loads and the demands that they place on the system, and a growing demand on the power grid for electricity. But it's also a tremendous opportunity to decarbonize not just the generation, but to decarbonize how we're meeting demand across all energy sectors. In this transition, we also have to think about the political impacts and the impacts on regional economies and on workers. So we're seeing increasingly that large centralized thermal power plants are being retired as they're no longer cost competitive, and there's increased concern about emissions of these plants. And it's critical that we invest in training programs that provide training for the workers who are losing their jobs through these transitions. It can be these power plants are a critical part of the local economy. And so we need to have a significant attention paid towards workforce development, retraining of these workers to support their engagement in the clean energy industry. At the same time, moving towards distributed resources, especially distributed solar that's customer sited and customer controlled, changes the utility business model, which has primarily to this point been about selling power. Now all of a sudden utilities are moving more to a role where they're just managing the system and the power is being produced by others. So this can potentially reduce revenues and reduce the kind of return they can get on capital expenditures. So we have to look at, utilities are moving more to models where they become the aggregator of consumer interest, and they play a role of managing competitive procurements, and we have to come up with innovative rate designs as well. I'll just I'll click through these. There's a number of policy steps that are critical to enable this transition to reliable, low carbon power grids around the world. I've already mentioned the importance of investing in the just transition and workforce development. Second, the use of robust and ambitious clean energy standards and competitive procurement processes. Third, looking at changes to market structures that will enable utilities and producers and consumers of energy to thrive in this very dynamic environment. We also need to support a portfolio of solutions. It's not just about renewable generation, but investment in storage and energy efficiency and smart grid and electrification of sectors. And this is a critical time as we're looking at recovery from COVID, to invest in green stimulus programs, investment in infrastructure and workforce development, innovation hubs, and research in these technologies and other solutions. I will close by mentioning one really exciting new initiative that we are launching, and we'd be happy to have collaboration. Nrel is partnering with 10 other technical institutes around the world on this Global Power Transformation Consortium, along with the CEOs of 6 of the biggest power system operators around the world, the 6 who are at the forefront of managing very large amounts of renewable generation, and with developing country system operators in Asia, Africa, and Latin America to do cutting edge research to enable the transformation, knowledge sharing, and direct support to these system operators who are at the forefront of managing increased amounts of variable renewable generation, leading to advances in research, tools and knowledge, and localized solutions, working very closely with a large set of actors, the development banks, development agencies that are working on these countries, and ultimately leading to scaled up investment, decarbonization and low emission of the grids, reliable systems, and low cost, reliable electricity for consumers. And happy to share more about this consortium and our other work and to find ways to collaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, for that. And we'll be closely following the consortium. And I liked what you said about the 3 drivers for the transition, and that youth are among one of them. And now we have gotten 2 presentations done. We have 2 more to go. And to the audience, because I've seen we have quite more people joining us, and welcome. We would like you to introduce yourselves in the chat. And if you have any questions, please include them in the Q&A session, as we will have a 30-minute slot for question and answers towards our speakers for today. And now I introduce the third speaker for today, Dr. Paul Webos, who began training as a mathematician and realized the limits of deductive logic. He began his quest to understand inductive logic and intelligence inspired by early AI. Dr. Paul has not one, but 2 degrees in economics from Harvard and the London School of Economics. He took the courses in quantum field theory for his Harvard Masters, but did not fully understand this subject until many, many years later when he started an activity in quantum technology and modeling at the National Science Foundation. His Harvard PhD thesis proposed the development of powerful, more biological, plausible reinforcement learning systems by the then new idea of using neural networks to approximate dynamic programming, including value function. He has spent many years advancing the fields of ADP and backpropagation and brain-like prediction aimed at developing and demonstrating the kind of designs which could actually explain the kind of general intelligence we see in the brain and in subjective human experience. In looking for applications which are really important to areas like energy, sustainability, and space, he has gotten deep into domain issues and organizations serving on boards of the National Space Society, the Millennium Project, the Lifeboat Foundation, the IEEE Energy Policy Committee, and as a fellow in the Senate in 2009. From 1980 to 1989, he developed the official econometric focusing models, 2 based on backpropagation, and was lead analyst for the long-term future at EIA in the Department of Energy. Welcome.
See how they fit together. And the energy ecology system involves levels of mathematics and complexity, which I found very entertaining. After 50 years, I could begin to see how the pieces fit together. When Dr. Boscola was speaking, I recognized these big models. My older son builds models like that in the climate system. But I have to admit, I'm more interested in the long-term climate issue, the one of whether we live or whether we die. And you get into the coupling of the oceans and the atmosphere, generating new phenomena, which are the biggest risks. So this past year, I was grateful that the Korean Millennium Project asked me to speak after Ban Ki-moon, the former Secretary General, on the issue of climate change. And I was so happy that this former Secretary General started out by saying how much he loved Greta Thunberg. And Greta Thunberg has been making 2 big points around the world. And the first one is that we are talking about the survival of the human species. What we're really talking about is one objective. Do we live or do we die? That's what I've been focusing on. And there is bad news and there is good news. The bad news is, once you study the climate science in more detail, it becomes more and more clear. Greta didn't prove it, but it's true. Our survival is at stake. But I won't spend an hour telling you just how scary it is. I already have a video up on YouTube on Euxinia, which is the worst case. If you want to know how bad it is, just go to YouTube, Werbos Euxinia. You can hear everything about death and destruction and why it's coming. But there's good news. And the good news is, I'm so happy to hear what Ron Benioff was talking about. I'm so happy that his group at Nrel is starting to pay attention to things we were funding before at the National Science Foundation. These are both important places, the National Science Foundation and Nrel in Colorado, developing the kind of technology which will make it possible to avoid the worst case climate change and make money. It doesn't even have to cost anything if we do it correctly. But there is more bad news, which is the politics. Every piece of climate legislation I've seen would cost hundreds of billions of dollars and not do the job. But the technology says we could do the job and make money. So there's an information gap between the technologies that Ron is developing, which are real, and the climate laws, which are affecting the public. There's an information gap. And that's why I'm so grateful to your group, to Ashley, for starting to create the communications to get reality all the way to the policy level so that we can take advantage of these new technologies and make money, not suffer. So mainly I want to talk about what we can do to solve the problem. So I only will show you one of the slides that I used in Korea to talk about why I think this is a real problem. As I say, there are long videos on this. I did not believe that Greta was right. When I was working for years at the National Science Foundation, I knew standard energy economics. I knew she was an alarmist. I knew she was exaggerating. I thought national security was more important than climate change. And then in the year 2009, I came back to the National Science Foundation for a special meeting where the head of geosciences said, listen to this talk from Peter Ward, the #1 real expert in the world on mass extinction of life in the history of Earth. This chart is your history. If we don't learn from the lessons of history, we will repeat them. These are the lessons of history of Earth. There have been 5 to 10 times when the poison in the air and the radiation were so intense, they would have killed every human on Earth. Peter Ward ended his talk by saying, oh, and by the way, I know this data. We are coming back to do it again. And if we don't change something, it will happen again. After that talk, I studied a lot. I could talk for many hours about the science that makes me worry. But let's talk instead about what you can do to solve it. Because at the end of the day, some of you are students. I think I was invited here because of a great guy named Hasala, who is a chief right-hand man of a professor, Ganesh Kumar Veniyagamurthy. If you're in electric power, you should know his name. If you're a policy lawyer, you may not have heard of him. But he is the person in the old NSF research community who was closest to having the answers to what Ron was talking about. If I were still working at NSF, I retired. If I were at NSF, I would try to get Ron and Ganesh together because there's a big connection between the technologies that Ganesh has been developing and the technologies Ron has been developing. I would say at NSF, we had better understanding of the advanced artificial intelligence. After all, that's my background. When you heard this long summary, okay, I got a job at NSF because of the work I did on deep learning and neural nets back in the days when other people didn't believe they could be real. When they turned out to be real, quickly they hired me to run the program in that area. So I know that advanced neural network mathematics gives us new opportunities to do what Ron talked about more efficiently and to integrate them with the electric utility industry. Very briefly, what's important for CO2? These grand climate bills, golly, they are politically correct. They make grand gestures. But some of us know that numbers matter. Some people think climate policy is about gestures and words and demonstrations. No, it's about the bottom line number. How much greenhouse gas is getting out there? If it's too much, we all die. If we cut it back, the danger is averted. So let's look at the numbers. Where does it come from? This data is a little old. It comes from a book which DOE no longer produces. We have had some political changes in Washington. but roughly speaking, 80% of the greenhouse gases comes from two sectors: electricity generation and transportation. The technologies of reducing it in transportation and electric utilities are the key. Any climate bill which doesn't improve transportation or electric utilities is a waste of money. If we want to be efficient, we need to ask, how do we reduce greenhouse gases in the electricity generation sector, which is partly an industry, and in transportation? We need what they call sectoral bills. In the climate politics world, the magic word is sectoral bills, measures which focus on what you can do efficiently in each of these sectors. So on Korean TV, I basically said, hey, if you really want to be cost effective, if you don't want to throw away money, if you want to get results, you need 5 actions. I don't think we have time to get into all of these here today, but the 2 big sectors are electricity generation and transportation. And as it turns out, there's a lot of detail. Let me just jump ahead. I ran the electric power program at NSF for many years. And I should have been in touch with Ron. I apologize. But I retired before I met you, so it's too late now. But this was what we were doing at NSF. This comes from the White House. This is from the National Grid Strategy Policy. And I like these words. I spoke to the White House before they gave us this mandate, of course. We are supporting research to develop a 4th generation intelligent grid that would use intelligent system-wide optimization to allow up to 80% of electricity to come from renewable sources and 80% of cars to be pluggable electric vehicles. I wanted the White House to cite all the many important research areas we were funding and all of the PIs. And you know what the White House people told me? They said, no, we don't need to cite them because you already did. You already have a definitive paper. People only need to go to that paper. When I had money for this research area, people would come to me and say and ask, what should I do? What can I do? I didn't tell them grow a green garden in the backyard. That won't change the world. I didn't tell them support a global ambitious bill that doesn't touch reality. Life is at the middle level between your garden and the Congress. In between, there's reality. And if you want to survive and you want to contribute, focus on reality, which is at the middle level. And in my paper, I described 20 research areas. People ask, which is the most important? I said, what's important is you pick one where you can make a difference and work with the other people. And we need to form a network together. No one person can do it. No silver bullet can solve all the problem. There are like 20 things that need to be done. And that's why we need an international network. Some of these are technical and some of them are market design for economics and internet. Market design is also a critical part of this. By the way, Ashley, forgive me, I haven't been looking at the time. If I'm over, I can just quit.
You're over by a minute, but you can wrap up in the next minute.
Okay, so one more minute. Picking a random thing in the electric power area. So between electricity and transportation, Nrel probably knows a lot about this. I know a lot about this. There have been huge breakthroughs in large solar farms. This is not distributed energy resources. These are much cheaper than rooftop solar. Rooftop solar is great for politics. There are people in Germany who will pay $1 a kilowatt hour for it. If you're a real person with real budget limits, that doesn't work for you. The really exciting thing is if we encourage more interstate power transmission, if we change the market rules to allow it, there are things we have done. There have been breakthroughs in thermal energy. There are other forms of thermal energy which might do better in the future, but right now, the breakthroughs in power towers are so exciting because high efficiency through more efficient conversion, and I do give some credit to Nrel here, allows you to reduce the cost. If you get twice the electricity for the same sunlight, you pay less money. If you pay less money, you can compete with coal and you can dominate the market if they let you compete. So there's a lot to be done with connecting the Brayton energy with thermal storage, which lets you pick the time of day. The storage breakthroughs are really important. They're much cheaper than batteries. Thermal storage for these guys is much cheaper than batteries. It really can change the world. And what we need is people to make these connections and bring it to implementation. So I guess that's my time. It's a big subject.
Indeed, it really is a big subject, Dr. Paul. And as you said, the numbers do not lie. And last but not least, we would like to welcome Mr. Ashley Lobo, who is currently a research assistant at University Vishweshwarya College of Engineering and the University of Victoria. And his presentation will focus on the circular economy and how it can help combat climate change. Welcome, Ashley.
Okay, am I audible? Yeah, give me a thumbs up if I'm audible. Great. Okay, so hi. I'm going to be talking about climate change. Before that, I'll introduce myself, right? So I'm an engineer graduate from Bangalore City, India. And my work does concentrate on transportation, as Dr. Paul recently, this Gartner, right? So I've worked on sustainability on topics like biofuels, natural fibers, and electric vehicles. And currently, I'm working on the market penetration, increasing the market penetration of electrical vehicles in India, correct? And in collaboration with professors from the University of Victoria. So climate change, right? So climate change is the first collective global problem which we as humankind are facing, correct? And why is it collective? It's because each and every one of us individually can contribute to it positively or negatively through our actions. Right? The effects of climate change are well documented, correct? Rising floods, drought, and even ocean acidification. And generally what happens is the lower strata of the society, right? The poorest is often the one which suffered the most. And here's a very ironic thing, right? The top 50% contribute nearly to 10, the richest 10% contribute 50% to the world's emissions, right? And I'm just going to link this studies as well on the chat so that everyone else can see it, right? And they can also refer to it. So I hope everyone can see my links. So I've referred everything and also made a special YouTube playlist for this talk. Okay, continuing with my talk. So basically, so the top 10% of the social circle are responsible for 50% of the emissions and climate change. And this is really bad. To combat climate change, right, we need a collective effort. We need prosperity where each and every individual is not only happy, safe, but is also gets rid of the carbon economy, like how Mr. Ron pointed out, right? We are entrenched in the carbon economy. Our definitions of success, prosperity, safety, and health it depends on the carbon economy, right? We need bigger houses, right? We enjoy our steaks and hamburgers, right? We need vacations every couple of months. We want to fly to new countries. All of these are extremely taxing to the environment and release huge amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. And most people do not have access to this lifestyle, right? The largest growing social class in the world is the middle class, and they aspire, right? Our definitions of success is entrenched in the carbon economy. So they aspire to come into this, and you tell them, no, this is not right. We do not need more people into this, living this lifestyle. Is that justified? And I've seen this argument that the developing world is responsible for the climate change, right? And as few world leaders point to India and China being responsible for the climate change. So I just want to point out one report done by the UN. Correct. This is the emissions gap report. Again, I've linked everything on the top right. You can see the numbers. So you can just click on the link if you want to check out that report. So the emissions report 2019 done by UN has this very interesting fact, right? From this, it looks like China is polluting a lot more, producing a lot more greenhouse gases compared to the rest of the country. But when we take a different view, right? When we take into per capita basis, we realize that the developed nation actually has a more carbon intensive lifestyle. Countries like the United States, Russia, and Japan have produced more carbon dioxide per capita compared to the developing nations. And talking about India, where I am from, we are per capita, we produce less greenhouse gases than even the world average. And still we are held as scapegoats. Right? The Western world was allowed to civilize and allowed to industrialize, releasing huge amounts of carbon. And when the developing world does the same, it'll no, hold on. Isn't that hypocritical? Correct. And also coming to China, right? The COVID-19 pandemic. All of us can agree that the COVID-19 pandemic was unexpected. Correct. It was something which took us by storm. And some people are saying that it's a blessing in disguise because there's reduced emissions, not only in transportation but also in electricity, in transportation because of transportation. But they need to remember one thing: 1 year of reduced emissions doesn't undo multiple years of degradation of the environment and deterioration of the environment. And with the COVID-19 pandemic, people are very skeptical about mass transportation like metros, trains, and railways, correct? And they're going to prefer more personal transportation, because of which, again, there's going to be pollution increase rather than what we expected it to be. And it's mutually agreed that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected us economically very badly. Right? Some estimates say that the global GDP has contracted by 5%, approximately around $4 trillion. Which is funny because that is the upper limit given by the United Nations. Actually, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, which is funny because that is the upper limit given by the United Nations, which is the cost of fixing climate change. So basically, every year we need to invest half to a whole COVID-19 pandemic to tackle climate change. That is how serious and big this issue is. That is how seriously we need to tackle climate change. That's the size of the problem, correct? And I have two theories of why climate change isn't that discussed and isn't made aware. The first theory is being, it is something which we're not aware of, right? It is an unknown beast which we do not know how to tackle. Problems like polio, malaria, and smallpox, right? Those are much more comfortable, right? Because of how much the modern medicine has evolved over the last 200 years. But the climate change is something which we still are trying to wrap our heads around, right? Because it's such a small, like it's so small, like the incremental is so small, but over the period it's massive, right? We do not know how to tackle it. And the second reason being, it affects all of us. It's not just one country or one continent. The whole world is affected by it. And when the whole world is affected by it, it requires collaborative effort by world leaders, correct? And this requires setting aside their differences amongst world leaders, which in the current climate, political climate doesn't seem that very likely, correct? Those are the two possible reasons why the climate change is not well discussed and well thought up. Now I'll come to the circular economy. This is something which has been talked about, and this is not something new, but I just want to get it in the context of this. Before we go into the circular economy, let me explain what the linear economy is. So generally, how things are produced today in linear economies, we take materials from the ground, maybe mining or whatever, and we make the product. And at the end of the life cycle, after the product is stopped working or is not working as efficiently as it used to, we dispose it off. But this model has a very, very serious flaw. It runs on the assumption that all materials are infinite, but it isn't. Some studies show that by 2040, we might not have copper left to mine. Right, and also another thing we need to keep in mind is, right, since these are being mined, one very, very popular quote by Albert Einstein comes. I'm just going to read it out. We cannot solve problems with the same levels and thinking we used to create them. We cannot solve problems with the same levels and thinking we used to create them. So basically, this requires a fundamental shift of how we approach climate change and how we approach consumption of our goods. Correct? In the circular economy, it's not very easy of just bending the linear economy, right? In the circular economy, we get rid of two major things. The first one is taking resources from the ground, correct? And second one is disposal. How? So basically, there are multiple studies which show that we get approximately 10 times of gold, silver, platinum, and palladium from, we get gold, silver, platinum from 1 ton of electronic waste compared to what we would in an ore, right? We require 10 to 20% less energy to extract copper from 1 ton of electronic waste than it is to extract from virgin ore. Correct. So this shows that there's a lot of potential in recycling, right? There's a lot of potential in recycling, which is untapped and underutilized. So I'll end up with an example, a real world example of the circular economy. I think I'm over, my 8 minutes is done. I'm just going to take another minute and explain what the circular economy is, right, with the real world example. So Philips, a very well-known light bulb manufacturer, has like a circular economy, right? In the circular economy, a company becomes a service provider rather than a seller. A company becomes a service provider rather than a seller. What do I mean by this? Imagine you have an organization, you want your lighting requirements to be met. So Philips comes in and you will pay for their services. It's like how you lease out your car or your house, right? Imagine a light is flickering, the light goes off. Philips comes in and replaces the bulb. You do not pay for the replacement of the bulb. You only pay for the service. So how is this helpful? This is helpful because of three major reasons. First one, the quality of which is used to make these bulbs will be much more higher, because if the quality isn't good, it's Philips who are paying out of their pockets, correct? Because of that, they are forced to make sure that the quality of the bulbs are good. This means a reduction of waste, and also means that there's no planned obsolescence bundled into this product. The second reason being easy repairability. Correct. Generally, we've seen these modern electronics is very, very hard to repair them. Right. All of us might have faced that dilemma. Correct. With the circular economy, what happens is the easy repairability is built into the product, so that suppose a bulb isn't working properly, Philips can easily repair it and get it back working, rather than being dumped in a normal linear economy. And the third reason being recyclability. Right. The problem with the current linear economy is what happens is recyclability is, as I told you, right, there's so much potential in it. Right. With the use of the circular economy, we can make sure that we invest a lot more and make a higher quality product, which is also recyclable, because I've already established that recycling takes lesser resources than than actually building it from scratch. So yeah, this is, I'll just show a final slide about what it is. So this is like generally how much greenhouse gases emissions is associated with materials production. As you can see in the bottom half, all these three are metals, right? And as I told you, recycling materials and especially metals makes much, much more sense than actually taking from the ground. So I'd just like to conclude my talk. And these are the references which I've already sent in the chat. And I made a special YouTube playlist also for this conference. You can just click on it. There are 11 videos, and 2 of them which are highly relevant, which talk about Game of Thrones and how it is relevant to climate change. So thank you everyone for sharing your time with me.
Thank you, Ashley, for giving us an insight on the circular economy. And I believe that Dr. Roberta, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so since you have to leave soon, is it okay to direct one question? Okay, so speaking, you said you work with developing countries a lot of the times in implementing the climate data. Is there any inclusion for indigenous knowledge in these plans, within knowing that indigenous communities live mostly in developing countries?
Sure. The projects that we have in the developing country, we also include pilot demonstration of these climate services. And in doing this, we have many participatory workshops. And of course, we also include the indigenous knowledge. And because communication of information is a big and important aspect of the climate services, we want people to use it, we want people to understand how to use it, and we want people to be able to relate to to relate this knowledge with the knowledge that they are used to. So yeah, there is a big effort, and this is where I would say WMO really relies on partners who are more regional and on the ground to really go to last mile and to serve, have the beneficiaries for these specific projects being the most vulnerable communities.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Roberto. We know you have to be somewhere, so you can leave the chat, but thanks for attending. And
I can stay here another 5 minutes. If any other question will arise for me, I'm happy to be here for another 5-10 minutes, but then I have to.
So actually, I have a question. I am excited by some of these things. I've been talking to people in Brazil. I didn't have time to talk about agriculture. It's terrible. It's a huge part of the solution. And I know people in Brazil who have deep thoughts about regenerative, sustainable agriculture, better livestock management and soil. Who are your regional partners? Who would you say people in Brazil should talk to connect to you?
Yeah, I think our entry point in every region would be really the Met services. Those who have the meteorological services, those who already have some interaction for agricultural climate services, agromet activities or agromet projects in the country. I think this would be the entry point. And we do all coordinate these activities, because also I think what WMO wants to transmit is looking at the system, looking at the services in terms of in the holistic way, and looking at the nexus between water, weather, and water, energy, and food as well. Because, for example, for hydropower, a big catchment and dam are built as a storage, but they do serve several sectors, which is the irrigation, agriculture, they make energy, but also this sanitation and industry. So we are looking at the system in a more like an interactive system between different sectors.
okay. Before we continue on with the Q&A session, we'd like to tell our audience that we do have an attendance sheet that we will be posting towards the end, so keep an eye on that. And we do have questions coming in, but please, you can still post them on the chat below. And we have a question from Victoria Yell, and she says, a question for the panelists: how do we ensure continuity in policy development to support renewable energy development and to address climate change between administration changes? Who would like to answer this? Ron, you talked about
Sure.
policy. Would you like to take this one?
I'm happy to try to answer the question. I think it's a very important question. And I think what it speaks to is the need to not only rely on leadership by governments. Governments are good at some things, but when it comes to really advancing innovative change and enduring change, it's vitally important that all sectors of the political economy engage. So that's where it's essential to have a very robust leadership by the business community, by academia, by youth, by political groups who are all have the knowledge and are mobilized to support a transition. And secondly, to be working very much with the early movers who will demonstrate the economic and technical case and will be inspiring models for replication. So in the US, for example, there are certain states, certain companies, certain groups of stakeholders who are at the forefront working at the community level of demonstrating that we can have power systems, for example, that have instantaneous generation up to 100% renewable energy that are cheaper, ultimately more reliable and lower emission. And we're seeing that in places like California, also even the Texas grid at times has very large amounts of generation. And we're seeing companies and individual utilities, Excel, many others, that are making the commitment to transition to clean, dominated power systems, and they're inspiring leadership by others. And that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, it is quite unfortunate that people have to go on the streets and demonstrate for resources, renewable energy that they do produce within their areas and communities. We have an interesting question from Will C, and they ask, is there a prediction on when, after funding and growth of these systems, we can reach a point where they will be profitable or not cost us more than the current systems? I am a 14-year-old climate activist. The youth are having trouble getting everyone on board with the need for the changes. If we can switch the conversation to the one that opposers are more comfortable with, that deals with profit and loss, we might have a better chance of getting others on board with the need to switch completely to renewable energy. So is there really a point that we can get to reach a point where there will be profits, not cost us more in our current systems? What do you think?
Yeah, I can start briefly if you want, but it in fact is the case that in most regions of the world now, solar and wind are the cheapest alternative. We see bids for solar and wind generation at 2 cents or less in some cases a kilowatt hour, compared to a retail price of electricity of 10 cents or more per hour. So the challenge in many cases is no longer one of cost, but of the infrastructure investment and needed. So finding the capital needed to put in the transmission and scale out the grid. I'm speaking now of large grid systems. So there is a need to, one, get all of the stakeholders, including vested interests in the conventional industries, to understand that renewable energy is the cheapest cost of generation, and to make available the capital to build out the transmission and the grid systems that will enable bulk renewable generation to thrive. I think there are also our challenges. Ashley talked about the circular economy. I mean, it's not just about power generation. We have to invest in changing our ways of manufacturing as well.
Yeah, I think it's important not to forget several key variables. The role of the information technology industry is huge. There was a time when I even thought the oil company lobbyists I know would run us into the ground. But thank God we have people like Google and Amazon out there to balance them out. In recent years, we have learned that Google and Amazon, well, they're human too. They have their own internal politics, and the oil companies have their internal politics. I have had experience working issues where one part of the oil companies wants to save us and the other part wants to destroy us. And it's very important to know which player you're dealing with and what kind of politics you're dealing with. Part of the information that needs to get out is that technology is critical, economics is critical, but so are these complicated context issues about markets and regulations. There's an example I had to live through years ago. When you ask about renewable energy beating us on the market, there's a story of Pickens, And maybe somebody needs to write the story of Pickens up and make it available to everybody in our community. This is a communication issue. People need to know the story of Pickens. Pickens was a very rich Texas oil and gas guy. I think he made a lot of money off gas pipelines. And at some point he realized that in Texas, you can put a wind farm or a solar farm, and you can make electricity cheaper than what these poor people on the East Coast are paying for. And he ran the numbers. And his numbers were biased by government incentives, but they were rational incentives. There were externality payments that some people believe are legitimate. And he looked at the cost and the economics, and he said, hey, I can make money selling electricity from wind and solar to the East Coast. And when he wanted to build a gas pipeline, it was easy. One-stop shopping. He would go to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. He would say, I want to build an interstate pipeline. And they would say, absolutely, no problem. The laws were there to let this important government agency, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, give instant approval. And then he said, okay, I'll do it with electricity. Then he discovered the laws are different. It's a lot harder to get permission to bring renewable electricity from Texas to the East Coast than it is to build a pipeline which destroys Indian reservations to make money for the Canadians to sell it to China. It's just amazing how the laws work out in practice. And so Pickens had a friend. He went to Senator Reid, the majority leader of the Senate, and said, hey, we need a level playing field. We need a fair market. Don't we believe in fair markets? Don't we believe in market competition? And at one point, Donald Trump said, I'll get rid of regulations which are irrational, which block progress. Hey, that's what he wanted to do. He spoke to his friends in Edison Electric. I met them. But he discovered that in Washington, what people promise to the public and what they do are sometimes two well-segregated planets, very different planets. And the guy from Edison Electric, I think he retired and gave up. It's really sad. He wasn't able to get the bill through. But the point is, I think there is hope for the concept of markets and level playing fields. And renewables would already be doing much better, even under the old technology. And with the new stuff from Nrel, the advantages are even greater.
Yeah, thank you for that, Dr. Paul. And before Dr. Roberta leaves, we have a question specifically directed to you, and they ask, what are your thoughts on geoengineering as a conceptualized solution to addressing climate change, and what impact would this have on sustainable energy developments, especially solar power, should this solution move beyond the concept phase? From Amaya Pasi. Yeah,
thank you very much. A very interesting question. From the point of view of the science, I mean, I don't feel like to be against or pro the geoengineering. I think we still need to understand the solution of geoengineering, if they really works, and if they are not solution that would alter or create other problems to the Earth system, put in this way. So I think for WMO is pretty much in favor of studying these solutions and be able to assess them in terms of solutions which are really helping to mitigate the climate change, or solution which might be effective but creating other problems. At this moment, I don't think we are able to say that. My only personal idea or thought is that I still think that the geoengineering is important to explore, but we do have a solution which we already know works and already know that can help with mitigation. And I think that we should not exclude one or the other, or but we should both, take in on board. And at the moment, I think the solution of the renewable energy is not only feasible, but also cost effective and technologically proven. As we heard from the distinguished speaker today. So I think is still an area of under investigation.
Yes. As Dr. Roberto said, renewable energy are our best bets. And we do have an interesting question here that I will direct to Ashley. It's from William, yet another 14-year-old climate.
I have to leave, I'm sorry, but it was really interesting, and good luck. I hope to be able to meet you all one day in person after this COVID, maybe.
Yeah.
Have a nice
It's
weekend.
Nice weekend. If we have any questions, we can direct them to you and you can answer them offline. Thanks for making the time.
Yes, I will be available for that.
Thank you. So Ashley, William asks, yet another 14-year-old climate activist, and he says the youth are struggling to get those who oppose a complete immediate switch to renewables because of the cost impact. Is there determination when renewables will start to be profitable so we can talk to our elected officials on profit loss and try to get them on board? And the youth have gotten out the message of climate emergency, but until we make it clear the solutions are here and the solutions will be profitable, we will unfortunately never get everyone on board.
Great. So yeah, so I would answer it in two parts. So first I'll take a particular example of the United States, right? And how the elected official is banking on the coal sector, correct? So especially coal mining, right, is a very generational thing, right? So people have been doing, like the people who mine coal in the United States have been doing it for a lot of generations. And these people, when a renewable energy, like imagine something, a new renewable energy plant is set up for generation of power, what happens is these people become, these people go out of job. That is the mentality which they have. But this is over here, it's very, very important to remember when the horse carriage came, right? A lot of people used to think that no, people when the horse carriages came into existence, what happened was people thought in a few years, the people who used to sell an automatic tiller, for example, right, when people used to give money. So people used to think that after the ATM machine came, what happens is people who used to act as tellers won't have any other jobs. But what you need to remember is these people will be replaced in a job which is much more satisfactory and which isn't repetitive. Now, answering their question directly, why aren't people moving directly to renewable energy? There are a lot of reasons, right? As Dr. Paul and Mr. Ron pointed out. Number one, it's not just like throwing money at the problem. Sometimes throwing money at the problem is much more harmful than doing good at the thing, right? Another thing would be, the awareness of it, right? Right now, currently, in this current situation, power gotten from conventional fuels and conventional methods is slightly cheaper than what you would in the renewable sector. This is very fast changing, and one of the main reasons is China, right? China is the main reason why we could afford, we are having the photovoltaic cells at such a low price. It's because they came into the game and they reduced the cost. So it is going to take some time, and it is going to not only require efforts from the government side, but also from us, right? We need to keep on, as the youth, we need to keep on pressurizing the government to make sure that the renewable shift is there. And also to make sure that the information which the people in the government have is trustworthy and easy to digest for them. So before the talk started, I still remember Dr. Paul pointed out that generally our diplomats are not technologically aware, right? So make it much more easier for them, right? And make it in a way that they can understand in a much better way. And we as constituents, when we elect leaders, we should be much more aware ourselves. We need to make sure that these people do support the renewable energy.
Yeah, that has been very well put by Ashley. I hope that answers your question, William. And there is a question directed to Ron directly, and from Amayo as well. You mentioned the Global Power Systems Transformation Consortium, and I'm curious to know whether you have any interactions with the regional power pools in East, South, Central Africa. If yes, how successful will the big plans to link the national electricity grids into the power pools be, especially in ensuring sufficient energy supply for development, industrial and domestic needs in the near future?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. The power pools in Africa, as well as in other regions of the world, play absolutely critical roles. I think you have to keep in mind that renewable energy, especially solar and wind generation, are variable resources. And so we need large balancing areas, large interconnections across big geographic regions to be able to succeed in always having power from a region where we have a high solar or wind resource. So yes, we are launching work with the Western Africa Power Pool and exploring collaboration with the other power pools in South Africa. Eskom, the South African utility, is a key partner, and they're a leader with the South African Power Pool. So we're also exploring collaboration there. Your point is absolutely right. Those power pools, not only in terms of managing the interconnection of generation, but also have a big role to play in terms of how they build capacity for national utilities, national operators. And so we're also working with the African Development Bank and APUA, the African Power Utility Association, on workforce development and training and technical solutions.
I think it's also important to mention a person. There's a specific person, James Momo, who is one of the cabinet ministers of Nigeria now, who is an important player. He should be connected to your network somehow. James Momo was chairman of electrical engineering at Howard University, which is where Kamala Harris had her sorority connections. Then he became director of the power research program at the National Science Foundation. He was one of the major technical leaders in the United States at fulfilling the goal of intelligent system management, far beyond the old control technologies of the past. He was one of the most advanced, real technical leaders in the United States. And then they offered him a chance to be a cabinet minister in Nigeria, where he is now. And this is an important part of the network we need to build. And who knows, I hope the United States makes contact with him also in the future.
Yeah, we hope so too. We have one last question from Hugh Gratner, and her question is to Mr. Benioff. How do you see the US in the current landscape and withdrawal from Paris investing in renewable energy transition and off-grid projects? Is the scientific work at Nrel impacted by the political landscape?
That's a good question, a hard one to answer. So the National Renewable Energy Laboratory is a Department of Energy laboratory. We are primary research funding comes through the Department of Energy, and priorities are set by each administration together with Congress, which appropriates the funding. So there is an impact on research priorities with each administration. There also are differing comfort levels with different administrations in terms of our level of engagement in providing analysis that will inform policy decisions. So yes, there's definitely an impact, but the good news is there has been very strong bipartisan support for research on clean energy throughout all administrations. In fact, our budgets have continued to increase over the last 5 years or so. And that's a reflection of the commitment of this administration and all administrations, as well as the Congress, to the value of technological innovation, as well as we have increased funding from business, and that's really exciting. We now have research agreements with Exxon, with Shell, with other major oil companies who are seeing that their future also lies in renewable fuels.
Okay, Mr. Benioff, before you leave, we would like you to give us a 30-second call to action message to the youth listening today in alignment with our theme for today. What can youth do in their different capacity to contribute to a more sustainable future?
So I think the most important message is to communicate that we are now at a place where renewable energy is in most circumstances the cheapest source of power. And we need to ensure that everybody understands that, and associated with that, invest in programs that will enable a just transition towards renewable energy and help bring corporations and workers along and be able to capture the economic and emission benefits of renewable energy.
Thank you so much for that. So, as you have all heard, communicate and invest in programs for just transition. And while we're still on that current wave, Ashley, would you give us your 30-second call to action message in the scene?
Yeah, call to action, yeah, definitely. So the first thing I would like to ask everyone, especially the youth, is just be aware of your consumption and your carbon footprint. Right? A lot of activities which we do have a lot of serious repercussions to the climate. And the second thing I would definitely do is build awareness, right? As William had pointed out, right? A lot of people aren't aware of the serious damage we're doing to the climate through our actions. So we need to build awareness not only in our society, but also in the elected officials, right? Sometimes they might be ignorant enough not to look into it. So it's our duty as youth to make sure that they are aware of the climate change and the serious problems it might bring to the future generations. So two things: make sure that you are reducing your carbon footprint, and second one, build awareness and make sure you apply pressure to your elected officials.
Thank you for that, Ashley. And Dr. Paul, your 30-second call to action message.
Maybe I should have spent more time on the 5 points, because every one of you can have a huge impact in one of the areas, one of the big pictures. We haven't done justice in detail to any one of them. They're all important. We need to build networks where we can discuss each of these things in great detail. I'm so grateful to the rest of you for bringing up aspects I didn't, because they're all important. And we need this diverse connection. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Paul. And we have come to the end of our webinar. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the panelists for their views on the theme. And special thanks to Sonali Mohammed and Koech for organizing this webinar. And we thank you for your participation for today. And there is an attendance link that has been posted in the chat. So please check out that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send it to us. I will leave my contact details below and we can direct them to the panelists offline. Thank you for making time, and goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.